think I have finally stumbled upon a real technique for growing blueberries at home that is safe and easy and effective and affordable, and most importantly, is backed by real science instead of old, tired gardening myths that don't work anyways. And the secret to the whole thing is this simple little bag of a creeping red fescue grass seeds. Yep, it turns out the whole time, the secret to growing great blueberries the easy way is to plant them in a big patch of grass. Who would have thunk it? Anyways, let's get started. Let's get planting and I will explain more as we go. So I've got this big raised bed behind me and this is where we're gonna be planting our blueberries today. And I've already filled it most of the way up with about 2 parts raised bed mix, just a cheap DIY raised bed mix, and 1 part of this bark chunk mix. Now I like to use this bark chunk mix for a couple of reasons. First off, blueberries just seem to like to grow in a chunkier soil mix. I think it mimics their natural conditions pretty well. And the second reason is this bark chunk mix will actually ever so slightly, just a little bit, reduce the pH of the soil. Will make that soil a little bit more acidic, and that's nice. Now there's a lot of misinformation out there about how bark chunks or wood chunks in your soil will drastically reduce the soil or drastically change the pH of the soil. And all the research I can find in my own experience doesn't bear that out. So I will link to a really good paper showing how really this stuff only very slightly changes the pH of the soil, and for the most part, pretty safe to put in your soil. I like using it anyways. Because I already have the soil mix pretty much ready to go, the first thing I'm actually adding in today is some of these elemental sulfur pellets. But before I do that, I wanna be really, really clear, you don't actually have to do that. The researchers who did this study with growing blueberries in grass, what we're basing this whole thing on today, they didn't actually use this stuff. They didn't do anything to acidify their soil. They just left it be and grew grass in it. Plus, elemental sulfur, sort of a pain to use because it takes forever to work. We're talking 4 to 6 months for this stuff to really acidify the soil. And that's because it relies on a biological process. It relies on happy bacteria in happy warm soil, not cold soil, to convert this elemental sulfur into sulfuric acid, which in turn actually acidifies the soil. So it's not like this stuff is gonna work right away. Anyways, that's really one of its major drawbacks. So again, you can choose whether or not you wanna put this in there and have it work for later, or if you wanna just skip right to the grass. I'm gonna mix mine in and kind of get the soil loosened up a little bit. It's been a while since we put it in there. All right, I'm getting my workout in for the morning. Now, it would be time to go ahead and plant the blueberries and the grass at this point, except I wanna add a quick layer of finer mix to the top of the soil. This bark-filled chunky mix is great for blueberries, but it's not very good for grass. If we put our grass seeds directly into this soil, into this chunky mix, it's not gonna germinate very well. It's not gonna grow very well, and then we've just wasted our money and our time. So I'm gonna add a few inches of finer raised bed mix onto the top here and plant my blueberries and my grass into that, and that way we're gonna get a lot better results. All right, so it's time to actually plant our blueberries and our grass here in the raised bed now that it's all ready to go, and we've got a nice top layer of soil here. But before we do that, I think we should talk about why we have to do all this weird stuff in the first place, right? Like, why is it that we have to go through so much extra trouble to grow blueberries? What makes them so different? Well, first off, what you need to know is that blueberries developed, they adapted to grow in super moist, acidic soil. And because that soil is so moist and acidic, it's really easy for the blueberries to draw the necessary iron out of that soil. In fact, it was so easy for blueberries to get the iron they needed from the soil that they adapted to grow in that they never developed the adaptations that most of our other garden plants have to get iron in more neutral soils. And that is why we have to acidify the soil for them. Now, on the total flip side of things is this stuff right here, grass. Many types of grass evolved to grow in really challenging, poor soil. And a specific adaptation that some grasses developed is the ability to release lots of compounds called iron chelators. And what the iron chelators do is they make the iron that is naturally available in the soil and naturally available in almost all types of soil bioavailable to the plant. They make that iron more easily available to the plant. So basically, when we plant this grass next to our blueberries, we are forcibly lending that cool adaptation to produce lots of iron chelators and get plenty of iron from this neutral soil to our blueberries, to these plants that never naturally adapted the ability to get iron from that neutral soil in the first place. This is one of the few examples of companion planting that has real science behind it. Now, if you're a little bit skeptical, I totally understand. Maybe this sounds a little bit like woo-woo nonsense, that kind of garden hack stuff that you hear on the internet that is clearly so fake. Like, why would growing grass help our blueberries so much? Well, what I will say to that is the majority of online blueberry growing guides actually do, unfortunately, rely on a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of gardening myths out there that pertain to growing blueberries. Adding coffee grounds to your soil, adding compost to your soil, adding pine needle mulch to the top of your soil. Those things are not actually backed by any science. They will not acidify your soil. They're not going to meaningfully help your blueberries grow, other than just adding some nice organic material to the soil, which we should be doing anyways. This actually has some real reasoning behind it, some real science behind it. And that's one of the reasons that, again, I am so excited by it. But if you don't trust me, and you shouldn't trust me, go check out the paper itself. I will link to it in the description. It's well worth a read if you've ever wanted to grow blueberries without all the headache. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I think this is one of the very few gardening hacks out there that I have found anyways that I think we should actually pay attention to and try out ourselves. Okay, with all the grass raked in, I'm gonna go ahead and plant my blueberries, and I'm actually putting 4 into this raised bed. Keep in mind that when it comes to blueberries, professional commercial growers actually leave them a ton of space. I mean, we're talking 5 feet between individual plants in rows that are 8 feet apart. Blueberries can get really, really large. For me, when it comes to my perennial plants, especially my fruiting perennial plants, you know, the non-ornamentals, I like to really pack them in tight and then keep them pruned to a smaller, more manageable size. And I do that because I want a lot of variety. All 4 of these are different varieties of blueberries that I really enjoy, and I want to be able to fit them all. But you should know that this isn't really optimal spacing. You really just have to decide if you want to fit in a lot of variety or if you want to make sure that each blueberry plant is putting off the biggest possible amount of blueberries. Really kind of up to you, but I just like to pack things in nice and tight. So I'm putting 4 different blueberries in here. You should also know that these are all southern high bush varieties. Blueberries are a really interesting group of plants because the subcategories of blueberries really matter. As I mentioned, this is southern high bush. Southern high bush tends to do really well in my hot, dry climate, although you wouldn't know it. Some of these are already getting a little bit droopy and they really need to go into the ground. Other types are going to include things like northern high bush, which, as you might suspect, tend to do well in more northern climates, very common in the northeast all the way up into Canada. Thanks for watching, my Canadian viewers. You also have low bush varieties. You have rabbit eye. Rabbit eye is one that tends to be really popular in the southeast because it does well in hot, humid climates. You also, with blueberries, have a large variety of sort of loosely semi-related, semi-domesticated types of blueberry or blueberry-like plants that can fit into this category and fit into different niches. And to keep this video from being super, super long, I'm not going to delve into all those different types. Instead, what I'm gonna do is link to a page that goes through all the different categories of blueberries so that you know which ones to look for. You can also ask at your local nursery. They are very likely to have a good idea of what types of blueberries are going to thrive in your conditions. For instance, you pretty much only find southern high bush here where I live. The other thing you should know about blueberries is that if you are growing them in a pot, right, you're putting one blueberry in one container, some blueberries are actually self-incompatible. And what that means is if you only have one of them, they're not going to put off fruit, or they're only going to put off a really small amount of fruit. You actually need to grow more than one variety in the same proximity so that they can cross-pollinate. Other blueberries, including southern high bush, in fact, to my knowledge, the majority of blueberry cultivars are semi-self-compatible. These are all gonna do fine alone. They're gonna put off fruit, but if I put them next to other varieties, other cultivars, they're actually gonna put off more fruit and it's going to be bigger and more delicious. So they really benefit from growing more than one plant in the same area, especially if you were doing different varieties. So just a couple things to keep in mind before you head out to the nursery and pick out a few of your favorite blueberry plants. Right, it is time to get these beauties in here. As you can tell, I'm spacing them out pretty evenly, each of them a couple feet apart and about a foot apart from the side of the bed itself. The soil is beautifully loose just because, well, we just loosened it, but that makes it really, really easy to plant. Now, as I get this out of its pot, I want to show you something kind of cool. Blueberries really have very peculiar root systems, and I think it's worth taking a look. You can see here, there's almost no roots that are getting all the way down to the bottom here. Most of the root mass is up here at the top. Blueberries create this sort of mat of fibrous roots, and it really tends to stay in the top layer of soil. So it will go down deeper, don't get me wrong. If you have 12 inches of good soil, 18 inches of good soil, they'll utilize that. But most of the root system is really in that top 8 inches of soil. So just kind of keep that in mind as you are preparing your dirt. By the way, you can buy blueberries like this as well in what is basically a bare root state. I know there's a little bit of dirt hanging around there, but that's basically just for moisture. This is effectively a bare root blueberry plant, akin to something you might see in a bag of bare root strawberries. In my experience, these are a little bit tough. I wouldn't necessarily recommend them if you are looking for the most sure results, but I wanted to grab this one because it's a nice compact variety, and I was looking for a couple compact varieties to grow in the front of this container here. And well, I saw this one and I couldn't resist. Just as a heads up, if you want to save a little bit of money, this can be a good way to do it. But I have grown a few of these, and I will say that they definitely seem to take a little bit longer to establish themselves, and they don't seem to do quite as well as the bare root strawberries. So kind of grow at your own risk. Before I plop this last blueberry plant into the ground, I just want to show you the roots on it. You can see that they have almost no hair roots, and that's really one of the reasons that they need a moist soil. They're not particularly good at drawing moisture from the soil. Kind of take the fact that they don't have a lot of those hair roots and combine it with the fact that their roots tend to stay in that top layer of soil, and you can understand why we need to keep that soil nice and moist. Luckily, that's what the grass wants as well, so both of them will do well with a nice, well-watered soil mix. Creeping red fescue grass, or Kentucky bluegrass if that's easier to find for you, plus blueberry plants. Turns out that's a match made in heaven. Who would have thunk it? Thank you so much for sticking around today. I hope you can deal with my bubbling, effusive enthusiasm for this one. I really think techniques like this, which sort of push the boundaries of what we're doing as home gardeners, are just so genuinely exciting. I love making videos like this. I hope you enjoyed watching this one, and I hope you're excited to get out there and plant some more blueberries of your own this year. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, y'all, happy gardening, and I hope to see you on the next one.